Well, the Department of Transportation has done it. I don't know whether you noticed last month that they issued guidelines for self-driving cars in the United States. The industry says that within a decade, a quarter of all the cars on the highway are going to be driverless. I don't know about you, but that makes me a little nervous. And when I talked to our older sons about that, they had a classic response for me. They said, "Papa, don't worry about it. You know, when you get old and decrepit and we're going to have to take your license away, look at it this way. You'll have a self-driving car that'll take you anywhere you want to go." Every time new technology comes out, people get nervous. Have you ever read the hysteria over electricity? When electricity was introduced into people's homes, people were freaking out. People even were quoted as saying, "I can't go in there. The fumes from the electric currents will poison me." And yet, there are times in which we do some of the most unbelievable things, like fly on an airplane. Now think about this for a minute. You get on a machine that weighs more tons than I can imagine, and they fill it with people and more weight in suitcases. I have absolutely no idea who's up front or what they're doing. They lock that person or persons in the cockpit, and I just sit there, and I let it take me wherever I want it to go. I trust that the person who's flying the plane knows what they're doing. I trust that the mechanics handled that correctly. I trust that there's a guidance system and an air traffic control system that's going to keep me from crashing into other people. We seem to handle that pretty well, except for people who are new to flying. You can always tell those folks. They're the ones that when the flight attendant gets up and begins to give the instructions on how to fasten the seatbelt and where the emergency exits are, they're very attentive. They're the ones that are clutching onto the seat the first time they feel the power of those jet engines thrust you down the runway. But there are moments, even for me, at that moment of thrust, or as we're coming down for a landing, that you're like, is this really working the way it's supposed to? And yet we do it all the time. The disciples say to Jesus today, "Increase our faith." They're approaching faith as if it's a quantity. "Lord, I need a lot of it. I need a lot of knowledge. I need a lot of things to understand. Help us to understand all what you're doing, what it's about." And Jesus completely ignores that request and turns it into something else. He says, all you need is a mustard seed. If you've never seen a mustard seed, it's smaller than a grain of pepper. Imagine looking at a small grain of pepper on your finger and cut that by about 75%. You can barely see it on your finger. Jesus said, all you need is that. And then he launches into what seems to be a bizarre story about slavery. Now, anytime we get stories about slavery in the Bible, most people get really uncomfortable. And I think it's because we have American slavery in the back of our minds, where one particular race of people were brought over to be in servitude to another. But we have to remember in Jesus' day, slavery was an equal opportunity employer. Anybody who was conquered became a slave. So slaves were from all races, from all nations, and slavery was taken as a given and an acceptable practice in culture. And Jesus used what people understood to talk about this idea of faith. And he says, okay, you got a slave and you're out in the countryside, and that slave has either been tending the sheep or working in the fields for you all day long. He says, when they come in at night, do you tell them, oh, come in, put your feet up, relax, you've been working hard all day? No. He says, you look at them and you say, it's supper time. Feed me. Cook my food, put on an apron, serve me at the table, And when I'm finished, then you can go and do what you need to do. And when you are finished with your task, Jesus said, say, I'm just a worthless slave. I've only done what I was asked to do. Okay. What the heck is this about? What is it that he's trying to say to us? What is it about faith that generated this story for Jesus? Well, the first thing we need to understand is that faith is not belief. Faith is not what I know. And I can't know more and get more faith. Faith would be better translated in Scripture as trust. The kind of trust that lets me get in a driverless car, the kind of trust that lets me use electric lights, the kind of trust that lets me get on an airplane. And Jesus is saying to his disciples, God's not asking for a lot. He's not asking you to go out on a big limb here. God's asking you for a mustard seed worth of trust. Do you believe that the God who created you, the God who knew you in your mother's womb, the God who fearfully and wonderfully made you, the God who loves you beyond measure, do you trust that God to do what he asks you to do? See, Jesus said, what you're looking at, disciples, is you're wanting to understand all this. You're wanting to fill your mind up with why I'm doing what I'm doing, how I'm doing what I'm doing. And what you've realized wrongly is that that's not what you need at all. What you need is trust. What you need is a mustard seed of trust. What you need to do is understand that you are God's servant. God created you for a purpose. And all you need to do is trust what he asks you to do. You don't need to understand why all this chaos is going on. You don't need to understand why all this difficulty is going on. All you're being asked to do is play your part in a divine drama which is beyond comprehension. If you ever come to 8 o'clock, or if you grew up in the Episcopal Church as a child, our traditional liturgy said it this way. We offer and present to you, O Lord, our souls as a living sacrifice for you. We place ourselves on the altar as a living sacrifice. Think about that image for a moment. Think about crawling up on that altar and saying, here I am, Lord, I am your living sacrifice. That's what Jesus was. Jesus was God's living sacrifice who stretched his arms of love on the cross that everyone might come within the reach of his saving embrace. Jesus prayed daily. Jesus looked to God daily. Jesus said, Papa, Abba, what next? What next? Jesus modeled what the disciples weren't seeing, which was that Jesus didn't have the whole picture. Jesus didn't understand everything that was happening. Jesus said, I am your servant. I am your living sacrifice. What next, God? What for today, God? What do you want me to do now, God? He listened. He spent time in quiet so that he could hear. And then he executed what God asked him to do. Day by day, step by step, moment by moment. And the problem with us, at least the problem with me, being a living sacrifice, is that I keep crawling off the altar. I keep saying, here I am, Lord, I'm going to do what you want. And then I get distracted and I crawl off and I say, oh, but I really want to take care of this. All the while God's saying, but I didn't ask you to do that. And when we're done, do we recognize at the end of the day that there is nothing that we are compared to God's glory and magnificence, that everything that we have from this generous God is a complete gift, and that we have only done what God asks us to do. That's what Jesus was trying to help his disciples to see and to hear. If you want to be like me, Jesus said, start with the mustard seed. Trust God that much. Listen to God that much. Say to God, what now? And from the moment that you get up until the moment that you go to bed, we are on call for God. We're not on call for us to sit and do what we want. We say each and every moment, what now, God? What now, God? What now, God? What now, God? And in the end, when he says, you're finished for the day, we give thanks to a generous God who would allow us to take part in his incredible divine plan. Increase our faith, the disciples said. Trust, Jesus said. Mustard seed. Trust God just a little bit. And if you do, and if you listen, you will be amazed at what he asks you to do. And you will be amazed at your part in his divine plan.